Our first reading this morning comes from the book of Isaiah, the 7th chapter, and I'll be reading verses 10 through 16. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, saying, Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not put the Lord to the test. Then Isaiah said, Hear then, O house of Israel, is it too little that you weary mortals, and he will weary God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, a young woman is with child, and shall bear a son, and shall name him Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey by the time he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land before whose two kings you are in dread of will be deserted. The gospel of the Lord comes from the book of Matthew, the first chapter, and I'll be reading verses 18 through 25. Now the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. And she will bear a son, and you shall name him Jesus, and he will save his people from their sins. And this fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet, saying, Look, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And when Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, and he took her as his wife, but had no marital relations until she had borne a son, and named him Jesus. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You know, I heard a story once of a pastor who went shopping and saw a great, beautiful train set displayed at a store. He watched it going around and around and around for a number of minutes. When he finally went to the salesperson, he told her, Hey, I want to take this. The salesperson beamed. She said to him, Your child will love this gift. You're going to make their holiday. Pastor paused and a minute thought about it and then said, You know what? In this case, I think I'll take two. You know, sometimes the best gifts are the gifts that we get for ourselves because we know what we want. In this case, the pastor had thought of getting the gift for himself and then decided to get another one after the salesperson had said something about the child receiving a Christmas gift. Perhaps you can think of a time in which you received a gift that was extraordinary. In the book of Corinthians, Paul was writing in his letter to the Corinthian Christians, encouraging them to give. And as he's talking about collecting a gift for this special offering, he suddenly stops and writes and says, Thanks be to God for this indescribable gift. Paul, that wordy theological scholar, had come to a loss when he began to meditate and contemplate on the gift that God had given to the world. In the book of Timothy, there is another early Christian creed that is found. Without doubt, it says, the mystery of our religion is great. He was revealed in the flesh, vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the Gentiles, believed throughout the world, taken up into glory. This might be one of the early Christian statements about what people believed about Jesus. And one of the things that we can say about it is that it's truly remarkable. Nothing like this had happened in the history of the world. And for Joseph, the message comes as a challenge. Joseph was engaged to marry. In the Jewish tradition of the time, there was a two-step process of marriage. First came the betrothal. That was a period where a contract that was written up that could not be broken only through divorce. But the second part would happen about a year later. It happened after the groom took the wife to his home, usually with a big banquet feast and celebration of guests and family. We are in the between these two events. Joseph knew that he was not the father when Mary was found to be pregnant. Clearly, whatever Mary had told him, he was still thinking about ending the relationship before the formal marriage of the part of the marriage took place. And can you really blame him? Was it any easier for Joseph to hear these news than for us as modern people or people of science? Jesus knew how children were born, and he had a hard time probably accepting the message until this divine angel approached him and said to him, "Do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for what the baby that will be born of her will be born of the Holy Spirit, and you will name him Jesus, and he will save his people from their sins." This is the long-awaited promise of the Messiah that many in Israel had hoped for. Joseph probably didn't fully understand it. We know that even Jesus' disciples wouldn't fully understand what it meant that Jesus was the Messiah. But this was a gift of God's own self given to the world for the salvation and for the restoration of all things. Although it was free and came through God's grace and love, it was still something that was costly. We can only imagine how this was for Joseph, having to embrace something that didn't make a lot of sense, and he probably was going to have a very hard time explaining to others. Later on, a very powerful and deceitful and power-hungry king named King Herod would seek to kill Jesus when he found out that there was someone that was born whose title was King of the Jews. Jesus and the Holy Family had to flee into Egypt as immigrants and fleeing King Herod. This cost Jesus, this cost his family, this cost Mary and Joseph. But it was a gift that came into this world, the good news of God's forgiveness and reconciliation and healing in the world, the good news that the King of Kings was going to be born. God didn't have to do this, but what God chose to do in the miracle of Christmas was come into our world in the flesh. There's a story that is told about a cold, wintry day when a man was looking outside his window and saw a little group of birds huddling in the cold. He wanted to provide shelter for them, so he put on his coat and he grabbed his lantern and he went out to an old barn that he had and opened the doors. But the birds didn't go in. He then took bread and made a little trail of crumbs, but the birds still didn't go in. He even lit the lights inside the barn and put hay everywhere so that the birds might be convinced to go in, but they did not. Finally, he thought to himself, "I must be a strange and terrifying creature. If only there was some way that I could get them to know that they could trust me, that I didn't mean them any harm, but have come to help. Ah," he thought, "if only I could become a bird and mingle with them and speak their language, I would be able to tell them in words that they could understand, that they don't have to be afraid." Just at that moment, the church bells began to peal the Christmas carol. Offspring of the Virgin's womb, veiled in flesh the God had seen. Hail the incarnate deity, pleased with us in flesh to dwell. Jesus, our Emmanuel. Suddenly the man understood. This is what Jesus did. This is what God did for us in Jesus Christ. God's indescribable gift of God's own self come into our world, to walk in our world, to walk alongside of us, and to reveal to us God's love. This fourth Sunday is Advent, as we await the coming of Jesus as the Christ child in Christmas that we celebrate. Let me encourage you to open the doors of your heart. Open the doors of your heart through faith. And once again, embrace this indescribable gift that has been given to us.